it's a real pleasure to say a few words at start this, which is going to be the first, I think, new series of lectures that's going to be organised by the postgraduate community at ESALA. I think the first thing that I want to say is just to stress that this is really entirely an initiative that's come from the postgraduate students. It's really, I think, a fantastic thing that they've put together and that they've done, and we put a lot of effort and work into organising this and the workshop. So I want to say thanks first of all, I think, to Fabrizio, who has really suggested the speaker and has done a lot of work organising it and talking afterwards. And I'll hand over to him in a moment to introduce Carlo Ratti. At ESALA, we were very large, diverse postgraduate community doing really an amazing range of work through architecture, digital media, landscape, cultural studies, history and theory. And at the moment, the postgraduate office tells me that at the moment we have 513 postgraduate students in ESALA on programs. So that gives you some sense of the size of the postgraduate community here. 94 of the students are PhDs, and they're really from all over the world. So it's really truly an international community, and that makes me especially pleased to have a lecturer coming from the US to give the first of these talks. And the first one, I think, will be a really international lecture series, and will, as the years go on, address different interest groups and constituencies within the ESALA postgraduate community. So I'll hand over to Fabrizio now, who's going to say a few words about this part.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Hi, it's good to see you. Before introducing Carlo, Professor Ratti, really excited. I would like just to give you a couple of pieces of information about the program today. So, after the lecture, there will be a drink reception, not here, but in the sculpture court at ECA main building. Especially for those of you that have signed up for the workshop, but do not go straight to the room, which is J3. But let's gather that together, so it will be also useful for those that have signed up for the workshop. Now, I was planning to say thank you to my PhD mate, Dorothea, who has organized the workshop, and of course to my supervisor, Professor Richard, that supervised both of us. Dorothea, unfortunately, couldn't be here because she's finalizing the last jobs of the workshop. But anyway, she was the top for it. Anyway, thanks, Richard, for the supervision of this event. And then I'm really pleased and excited to have Professor Carlo Ratti here. Not just because he's an affirmed academic and professional. Furthermore, we have both shared nationality, so somehow for being a PhD student, of course, I wish I would have a similar career development one day. No, it's not simply because of that, but especially because it's not really every day that I have the possibility of having such a polyethnic personality presenting his work. Professor Ratti's work spans from really architectural design to architectural technology to data visualization to engineer. So it's really a diverse range of topics that is embraced through his work. So, Carlo here, thanks. Yeah.
Thank you Fabrizio, thank you everybody, friends for inviting me here today. Yeah, this is much better. So, yeah, perfect. So it's a And what I'll do today, actually, I kept my presentation quite short, so we can have a bit more discussion at the end, comments or questions, and I will more slides if you want to add you more slides later, but I'll keep it a bit short and share with you some of the work we're doing at the moment. I will start with this. So the sound is very low, so let's all be very quiet because sound is not. So this was one of the automats that were very popular in France in the end of the 18th century. Marie Antoinette and many other people at the time were actually playing a lot with this. And I think that this actually highlights, as one example, that highlights something that's a human struggle that we see over and over in architecture. You know, when Michelangelo sculpted the Moses, so the story goes, he took a hammer, he threw the hammer at the Moses, there's still a little chip on the knee, and then he shouted, "Perché non parli? Why don't you speak?" And that turned out trying to actually have things, to create things that actually respond to us, that speak to us, and what we see in many other cases. We see the beautiful Baroque structure. This is actually Guarini's cupola in Torino. We see it in all what we see in the Art Deco, Art Nouveau, in the Liberty, just a little over 100 years ago. What we've seen recently in buildings such as this one, which is Zaccali, new building in Saragossa. But actually there's something terrible about these buildings. You know, they try to be alive. They're actually set frozen in stone. They're frozen in stone and steel. They don't move. They try to capture movement, but actually they're dead. They're dead buildings. They try to show it, but actually just the surface. It's not the reality. And at the same time, some other people try another route. And you might recognize this. It's actually one of the sketches by a great architect from this country a few decades ago, Cedric Price. That's from the Fun Palace. And what Cedric was trying to do is actually inject life in building in a different way. To use interaction with people is a way to create a dynamic, interactive condition between who's in the building and the building itself. And that, of course, was coming from cybernetics. It's not about giving the impression of movement, as you see inside this building. It was actually how to make that relationship dynamic in a different way. And if it goes back to cybernetics, that's from Gordon Pask. Gordon was one of the people who actually popularized cybernetics for architects. You know, it's really about systems that behave like living systems. As you see here, they regulate themselves and survive. They adaptively compute, they invent. Now, the amazing thing we believe today is that for the first time, actually, our cities, our buildings are starting to behave in that way. Our cities, over the past few years and decades, have been layered with many different types of networks, with sensors, with digital information. In a certain sense, it's almost like the world of bits and atoms coming together. And because of this, the way we can actually collect information from our cities and can respond to that information is actually making some of the dreams of Price and many of the other people at the end of the last century a reality. A lot of cybernetics is really based on a dynamic interchange, which is really sensing and activity. That's what most engineers would call, you know, sensing, collecting information from a system, and then actually responding to that information. And what is happening today is almost in every place, every sensor, every bit, every atom out there in the physical space are kind of converging. Every point outside the physical world is becoming both a sensor and an atom. Now, I want to share with you some examples. Like in this project, it's a project that was at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, by Gregor Cruz, who's another group. What you see here is Lisbon. Lisbon captured by using billions and billions of data points collected from taxis. You know, we couldn't understand the city like this just 10 or 15 years ago. The city like a living, responsive organism. And you know, these are all the data that are collected for other reasons by the taxi. GPS traces that then are combined and mapped in a different way. Our lab was actually one of the first ones back in 2006 to take data from millions and millions of cell phones in a city and try to capture the pulse, how the city lives and responds. 2006 was when Ricky Boudet, professor at LSE, was running the Venice Biennale, was the curator. So we had a pavilion in the Biennale. And we believed that we should show this project there. We decided to focus on the city of Rome. And actually, we were very lucky that that was 2006. It was when there was a soccer program. And actually, it's a match we call Italy and France were playing. At the end, Italy won. Look at what happened with the city of Rome by mapping the city using data from millions of people as they move and use their cell phones that day. This is the day of the final. It's before the match. You see up there, you see the city of Rome, you see the river, you see the Colosseum. You know, people moving here and there during the day, making calls. And then the match begins, silence. Nobody talks anymore. And then France scores, Italy scores, half time, people make a call and go to the bathroom. And then second half, end of normal time, the famous headbutt by Zidane, in moment, and then Zidane, Italy wins. And then that night, everybody went to celebrate here in the center. Let me just, can I do something? So the sound is not really loud, but it's something really nice. Right, okay. Thank you. So anyway, that night, everybody went to celebrate up there. You see the defeat. The following day, the same thing, we did the winning team, and then actually, at the end of the day, everybody went down to a place called Circo Massimo, where since Roman times people go and have big parties and celebrate, and actually had a big celebration. So this is what you can see at the level of the city itself. You can look at the same thing at the level of the planet. That's a project that we did at the Natural Exhibition at MoMA, New York, the Museum of Modern Art, called New York Clock Exchange, where we actually looked at global communication flows. And what you can see is actually how they change between time of the day. You see this London waking up and connecting to New York. And you see here is the sun is coming to the Americas. And so you see in real time what happens to the different cities. All this is real time information for the global communications network. And then how all of this actually creates this web of digital information that weaves together all of our planet. Let me stop for just 1 minute and try to fix the sound. Yeah, let me just share this. It's not great. No, it's nice.
Right, it's a match with your laptop.
Yeah, it's much more.
Yeah, it's unfortunately it's not that easy.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and then we'll see if we can fix the sound. So, you know, those two examples were where actually use data from the existing network, but there's many other ways you can actually collect information about the city. In this project, what we did was start with this computer you see here. Today, you know everything about this computer. Every chip in this computer, you know where it was produced, how it moved on the planet, you see it on the map, how it became this machine. However, a few years from now, you stop using this machine, you throw it away, and then you know very little about it. Sometimes this is what happens with a lot of our electronics. A lot of electronics from Europe being shipped illegally to Africa, to the United States, to Asia. So our idea was, what if you could develop actually a little chip, put the chip on trash, and then follow trash as it moves through our cities. It's a little bit like when you go to a hospital, they put a tracer in your blood with nuclear medicine, and they follow your blood through your body to see what works, what doesn't work. How could we do the same thing at the scale of the entire city? We couldn't find anything off the shelf to do it, so we had to design a little tag. We did it with Qualcomm, a big chip manufacturer in the United States. That's almost like a miniature cell phone we had to engineer. This was the first deployment we did in the city of Seattle. So 500 people came with a piece of trash, 3,000 pieces of trash. We put a little tag on all of them. And then after tagging all of them, we started following them. That's 3,000 pieces of trash in the city of Seattle. The day of deployment. After a few days, some of them made landfills next to Seattle. But actually a big surprise, how far things started to travel. Sometimes in crazy and unpredictable way. Look at the trace that went all the way to Chicago and then down to back to California. And then still moving after a while. So when you do this, what you learn? The first thing you learn is actually get a lot of data from the city. And then if you're an engineer, you can actually try to design a better and more efficient system. So, think about how much energy could be saved if we were to plan those movements in a better way. Sometimes we did an analysis, we put more energy into a piece of trash than what we'll ever recover from the piece of trash. So, then if you got this information that before was difficult to get because everybody used just a small piece of the chain, or the kind of, not the supply chain, or the removal chain, then if you got this information, you can actually optimize our cities, optimize the system. The other thing that's very important is that actually if you take all this data, you share it with people, you can actually encourage behavioral change. And the idea is that because we know so much more about the consequences of our action, then that can be an interesting feedback loop. Again, cybernetic feedback loops, they can help us change our behavior. Just give you one example. At the end of the project, somebody came to us and said, I used to drink water in plastic bottles every day. And then you throw the bottles away, and you forget about it. But now, after the project, and all those bottles go a few miles from home, they go to a landfill, they will sit there forever. And so I stopped drinking water in plastic bottles. The third thing we discovered actually happened more recently. Happened just a few months ago when a burglar came to our lab at MIT. And the poor guy stole a lot of things, including many of the tags that tell you where they go. Many of the tags and the computers that tell you. This is what happened. Now we've lost totally the sound. We perhaps so that's maybe a few of them in Edinburgh, but they tell you very little about your own personal exposure. So if you give sensors to people, you can get personal exposure, which is the main determinant of health of individuals. And then that can actually, again, help you to change things. It can be both because you put political pressure on the government, or because you decide to take a different route when you go through. So what we did actually was develop sensors that we gave to people in order to measure air quality themselves and share it with other people. What you see here in the video, because at the Shenzhen Hong Kong Biennale just a few months ago, you see the video, the color of the video actually is proportional to the level of pollution. quick summary of a lot of the ways we can now collect information in a dynamic way from our cities, from our buildings. We can understand them almost as living organisms. I want to show you just something just as a caveat. And the caveat actually comes from Italo Calvino. Most of you probably know Italo Calvino, who wrote Invisible Cities. This is a much less known piece of work by him called The Memory of the World. And actually, all this is great. We can actually understand our cities, our world in a much more dynamic way. But what we're doing beyond cities, beyond architecture, is actually create a digital copy of our physical world. And that can also have very scary consequences that we should all be aware of. It's about digitizing every possible thing. It's about creating a world of total recall, where it becomes always possible to forget. The funny thing is actually, back in 1968, before a lot of the digital revolution, they started thinking about it. They started from the condition of archiving every possible thing we have on the planet, and ended up to absurd and paradoxical conclusions. So we should all also be aware of this and take all of this in a critical way. But this was all about the sensing, very briefly, how today we can sense architecture, buildings, cities, objects in a different way. But what about actually? The key thing about cybernetics is how you can transform the system, how this becomes a dynamic loop of sensing, and actually becomes a dialogue. And that's really where we've been working a lot over the past 3 years. When I moved to MIT after finishing PhD in Cambridge, it was 2001, I started working with Hiroshi Ishii. That was the first project I did at MIT. It's called Sandscape, it's still there. It's a box of sand. You got a 3D scanner, and in real time you capture the surface of the sand, and then you can project back on the surface. So it becomes almost like a living dynamic material. You sense and you act. You get information and you respond in real time. It actually is funny, at the time in 2001, we wanted to actually have the surface move by itself. And I was so happy last year when Hiroshi, over 10 years later, actually Hiroshi Ishii, the leader, developed it, and he launched the follow-up project in his group. Managed actually to do that. What we did actually was try to imagine just projections, how projections could make the walls of our buildings more alive. In this case, we use a very simple projector developed by IBM. It's a projector like that one, but what it has in front of it a mirror that rotates a little bit like what happens in clouds. In clouds you got those mirrors that rotate and project around yourself. And then it has that plus automated keystone. So from one position, you can actually project all around yourself. So our idea was, how can we create a piece of architecture where every surface will become alive through the means of digital projections? In one single projection will allow you to throw light and digital information everywhere, and that information can also follow you. You got a simple tracking system as you move through the building. So this was the design that we wanted to be beautiful, of course, but at the same time we wanted it to maximize the co-visibility of surface. So it's a case where you want to design, but also in mathematics or analytics in order to actually combine the two things. And in this case, to maximize how surfaces all face each other in order to be able from one point to project everywhere. And here you see the space. It's also a great space when the projector is off. You can live it, and enjoy it fully. But at the same time, you turn on the projector, that the surface becomes alive. This is another project we had at the Venice Biennale this year. This year was created by Ben Kulas. So Ren invited us a year ago to a small pavilion with the installation in part of his exhibition. And we started by looking at this. This is a paper we did, a scientific paper we did a few years ago, where we looked at energy consumption in buildings, especially on the MIT campus. And what you see today is something quite absurd. Today we heat our buildings even when nobody's there. What you see here, you see two curves. On one curve, we looked at occupancy in buildings on the MIT campus. How many people are there? And we did that, they actually looked at the Wi-Fi signature. So through that, you can actually see how many people are in every building. What you see at the top is actually energy consumption. And what you see, there's absolutely no relationship. We waste a lot of energy to heat empty buildings. We waste a lot of energy to cool empty buildings. Think about our homes during the winter. They are empty during the day and we still heat them. Or our office building, same thing. So a lot of this is now being fixed through digital thermostats like Nest. So the idea that through digital technology we can actually modulate energy consumption, actually put energy consumption where we need it, where people are. In this case, we try to go one step further and say, can we actually imagine a future where each of us will have like a bubble of heat following us, as we call it local warming. We did the first test outside of MIT, so that's MIT at the entrance is quite cold during the winter. It can be -10 or -20 Celsius. And so actually, as you enter the MIT, you have your own bubble. You can actually customize the bubble, say you want to have 17 degrees or 20 degrees or 25. You have this little bubble that will track you and follow you. So that was quite successful, and then what we did at the Venice Biennale, which is still on, if any of you is in Venice before the end of the year, was actually try to implement it there on a bigger scale. What we did, what you see here is a bit, we had to, in a certain sense, to overdo it at Venice Biennale in order to explain how it works, to show it in a very evident way, but you can do the same thing in a much more subtle way, just embed it in a false ceiling, and have this additional heating that follows people as they move through the building. This was the installation at the Biennale, which is on right now. And one idea that came up at MIT, it was at the workshop, but also Bill Mitchell, that is Frenchman, and people were part of it, a number of students, was we had this idea, imagine you have a pipe, and that pipe has many tabs. And those tabs are open and closed controlled by a computer. So what you get like a living wall. You get a wall like this, where you can actually show images or text or patterns, even something where you approach it, and it opens up to let you in. The main right idea, so we got the commission to design the building at the entrance of the expo. The building is called Digital Water Pavilion. All the walls are made of water. You can show images or text or patterns on the water. There's no doors or windows, but when you approach it, it opens up to let you in. When you're inside, all the walls expand and shrink as you move. The roof is also covered with a thin layer of water. What you see down there is actually the Zagreb Bridge I showed you before, just next to us. And then, if there's too much wind, you can actually lower the roof to minimize splashing. Or at the end of the day, you can actually close the building and the architecture disappears. Hopefully without anybody on the roof. Well, we have sensors for that as well. So we had a lot of fun in doing the video. Honestly, to be totally frank and honest, we didn't think we could build it. But then what happened was quite fun that like 6 months before the expo, 9 months before the expo, Time magazine called it Best Building of the Year. And the best idea, best concept, best invention of the year. So then they say, no, fuck, now we really need to do it. And so we actually worked very, very quickly for the past 6 months in order to erect the building. Here you see the building just before the opening. I like this picture because you see the guy with the shovel. So he stopped there, worked fast, then here you can see the projections on top of the wall. So you see the digital projection on top of the physical pixel combined. Here was myself trying not to get wet, so testing the sensors. And I should tell you now what happened actually one night when all the sensors stopped working. You know, we build beautiful things full of electronics, of things, of responsibility listings, the thousands of valves and sensors and computers and so on. And actually computers crashed. They were probably Windows, not Mac. And so that night we were terrified because we wouldn't know what would happen. That night while the building would keep on doing some crazy things, and cuts and holes and things, but without responding to people anymore. But actually that night was one of the most fun nights ever. That night thousands of kids from all over the city came to the building to play a new game. Not anymore a building that opens up when you're approaching, but a building that you need to engage like this. And you know, for us it was important because as architects, as engineers, we always think that we know how people will use the things we design, especially now that we design more and more interactive things. But then, in reality, and especially human reality, is always a surprise. I want to share with you one project in more detail to think with you about the methodology, what we think are radical major changes happening today in architecture and planning. The project started in the city of Copenhagen. Now, the city of Copenhagen, the neighbor came to us and said, well, can you help us do something with traffic? And see how we can use digital technologies in order to change, to ameliorate traffic in the city. And you can all imagine the face of all of us with a good team of American students, researchers, going to Copenhagen and see that traffic in Copenhagen means bicycle more than cars. Copenhagen is a city where 30 to 50% of all trips every day actually happens by bicycle. So we started thinking about bicycles and we came up with a following.
Welcome to the Copenhagen Wheel. The wheel turns your ordinary bike into a smart electric hybrid. Quickly and easily, with no additional batteries or wires. The Copenhagen Wheel allows you to capture the energy dissipated while braking and cycling, and save it when you need a bit of a boost. Controlled through your smartphone, the Copenhagen Wheel becomes a natural extension of your everyday life. The Copenhagen Wheel is your personal trainer, sensing your effort level and providing you with real-time feedback about your fitness and exercise goals. The Copenhagen Wheel also enhances your experience in the city. It connects you with things the cyclist wants to know: upcoming traffic congestion, road conditions, and pollution levels. Choose to keep your data, or share it with your friends and other cyclists through social networks like Facebook. As you ride, you also collect green miles. It's similar to a frequent flyer program, but good for the environment. Elegant, responsive, smart. A new mode of transport for a rapidly changing world. So turn on your right and turn on the city. The Copenhagen Wheel.
So, what I want to share with you is actually how we developed the project. Again, the project started with a workshop at MIT with a number of students. We came up with different ideas, and one of the ideas was also this, it's interesting actually, the first idea we came up with is now a successful startup that actually looks at the social network for cyclists and how you can meet other people and share information on cycling. The overall idea was also this funny looking wheel. At the beginning it was not much more the funny looking wheel that was not technology, but the idea that this wheel actually could get your energy when you brake, and then use this energy to give it back to you and to do something fun. So, like many times, if you got an idea, if in doubt, let's try it out. This was the end of the workshop, so we just, these are the first sketches. We tried to make a prototype. Here you can see the first pieces, laser cut and bend. It's very easy today, as you all know, to do prototypes. You just 3D print or laser cut stuff. It takes you 10th of the time it would take just a few years ago. Combine the battery, mount it together. It doesn't look very good, but this was working. So this was the first wheel. Here was with the mayor in Copenhagen, in the main square in Copenhagen, and she liked it. So she said, well, let's go ahead. So many times, back to the drawing board, we tried to define, to clarify to ourselves what we really wanted, look at the brief and refine the brief. Schedule again, change the motor, put all the pieces together, select new motors, the sensing inside, and then all the pieces for the hub. And so far we have mostly some designers working with mechanical engineers and a little bit of electrical engineering. Then of course we had to connect the center to the outside, the rim. This was the first design, pretty appalling, pretty bad. This was a bit better, but actually it didn't work. If you think about it, the torque doesn't go from the center to the ring, from the hub to the ring. Then we came up with this idea because actually you can think about spokes that start from the ring, simply touch, without being connected, simply turn 180 degrees, touch the hub, and then turn and then go back to the ring. And we like the idea of this, we like the fact it looks a bit magical when you see it because the spokes are not connected to the hub. They simply touch it on the outside. But we didn't know if this would work. Some of us thought it would, some of us thought it wouldn't. So again, if in doubt, let's try it out. We did a model. This was done laser cutting very quickly, we 3D printed. The beautiful thing about 3D printing is that we went in 10 years from 3D printing things that were like models made of powder. We were good in order just to explore a shape to something that actually can be structural, made of plastic, or even today, really a lot of 3D printing with metal. And that becomes very exciting because you can do a fully working prototype just quickly by using one of these tools. So then was the 3D printed hub, mounting the spokes. He was very skeptical, you can tell. But actually this worked. So this was the way we connected the hub to the ring. And then we had to add the sensing, as you heard before, and add all the control through the smartphone. Again, here we actually had other people in the team help out. It was a great guy. We background in both computer graphics and interaction design, so we started developing the app to write, analyze, and share your information to control the wheel. And as you heard, also all developed the sensing part. Now, today people do sensing with bicycles. Believe it or not, but these are real projects. Okay? And we didn't want to go this way. We want to have something very small, like this. Usually it's a quarter, so very small elements you need to put inside the wheel and measure important things. So then that's very important as a cyclist to know the air quality around yourself and how you can share the information with others. Before that, we're just going to go to a few bicycles in Copenhagen. Just a small number of bicycles. Moving for a few hours, just very quickly, you get a lot of information about the whole city. A bit like we saw before about Shenzhen and Hong Kong, how people themselves can become the ones collecting information and crowd sensing, sharing this information with other people. So, well, finally this we had to prepare the prototypes. The mayor wanted to present the bike at a big summit. President Obama and many others were there in Copenhagen. So we had to prepare a few of them. Here was the real thing, mounting everything together, programming all the processors inside, and then shipping them to Copenhagen. Here you can see the presentation. It was really detailed presentation. Here was the mayor of Copenhagen trying the first wheel actually ever produced. So he did a video with her in the mayor of Toronto trying One thing I want to so I showed you this to think together about methodology, how we can do design together. Now, I'll get back to that in a moment. The first thing I want to tell you is actually that there was a prototype. Like it happens a lot at MIT. MIT, there's something that people do in the institute, sometimes files a patent, and then the researchers themselves are actually encouraged to take the patent and do something with it, like a startup. So actually this then became a startup. I'm one of the founders, but it's run by Asaf Edinburgh, who is the associate director of Sense and Procedure Lab. And it's been very successful in the past 2 to 3 years with a lot of venture capital funds, and is now on pre-sales. I'll show you 3 years later and several $1 million of investment. The product looks the same, but actually it's totally different inside. It's like this.
This is the Kalogianni wheel. It turns your ordinary bicycle into a smart electric hybrid by simply replacing your back wheel. Connect it to your smartphone, download the app, and you're ready to go. Bicycle.
And I'm stopping here because the rest of the video is the same. I think it's something quite interesting for all of us as artists. Art has always been complaining about clients. Clients telling you what to do. Think about Barragan. Barragan, one of the greatest artists of the past century. Mexican architect, he worked until over 50 in order to do buildings and for clients. And then at one point he writes and he says, I'm tired. Now enough is enough. Now I'm not going to work for clients who tell me what they like and what they want to do. From now onwards, I will only have one client, and that's myself. And since then, all the stuff is so far is quite rubbish. You can still see it, still now people go and see it, but it's pretty rubbish. They gave 5 units or 5 pieces of architecture. And with those 5, he actually won the Pritzker Prize. He did 5 beautiful things, including his own office in the Kalogianni in Mexico City, which has all the wonderful elements that he developed in the later part of his life. I think what we can do today as artists is actually finally use some of the new tools. Think about Kickstarter, follow ourselves as clients, and then use the power of the network, the power of what we have out there in order to realize some of these things. So I think that's also something that we're seeing more and more, where you can just take an idea you really love, you're passionate about, develop it, and then if it's a really good idea, I'm sure you'll be able to carry it over. And it was much more difficult in the past, it's much easier today at the time of the network, at the time of Kickstarter. But beyond this, there's something even more profound that we think is happening today in architecture, something that's going to radically change really what architecture will be 5 or 10 years from now. Now, we used to think that actually knowledge was something like this. That was indeed the St. Thomas time. When St. Thomas wrote the Summa in whatever the year, he thought everything could be put in the right place. That all of human knowledge would actually be fit into the right spot, into the right pigeonhole. And we've been thinking that till very recently. But if you have to think about the map of knowledge today, that map probably looks a bit more like this. This map was on the cover of Nature, one of the most respected scientific journals. It actually was built by taking 800,000 papers and looking at all the links between those papers. So we see these beautiful connections emerging between brain research and say mathematics, or computer science, or social science, all of where everything is connected to everything else, almost like a map of the internet. The second issue of Nature actually looked at the most important papers in the past and today. You can very easily look at the most important papers in a similar way. It's quite similar to Facebook. Facebook, you've got the likes, the papers with your citation. The very important papers are the paper that many other people will actually cite and refer to. Well, if you look at the most important papers in the past, usually they were from one author, from one very well-defined discipline. There was still the idea you could be Newton, see that Queen's College in Cambridge, and an apple will fall on your head, and then you have a great idea, gravitation, you publish it, get a lot of citation, a lot of likes on Facebook. Well, today actually the most important paper, the most valuable paper, usually come from many authors from different disciplines. That was what Nature found by looking actually at the database of all their publishing. And we believe that about collaboration and about interdisciplinarity is finally arriving into design and architecture as well. We used to think about architecture like this. This was actually Le Corbusier, an architect of the past century, as you know, who was presenting his plan was then for Paris in the 1920s. And his ideas were quite simple. Where basically demolish the whole city, just leave Notre Dame and a couple of other schools from the past, and replace everything with this beautiful modernist skyscraper. And what you see here is the hand of Le Corbusier. Which is the hand of the architect, but if you want, almost the hand of God, making his plan on his own for millions of people in the city of Paris and elsewhere all over the world. As this wasn't realized by Chandigarh and other things were actually together. And people said, you couldn't work collaboratively. There was even a with Thames and Hudson next spring. It's called Open Source Architecture. The book actually started with an editorial that they did for Domus magazine a couple of years ago. Domus was having a whole issue on open source architecture, and so they asked me if I could write the introduction to the open for you. And I said, sure, I'm happy to do it, but if this is about open source, maybe we should also do the open in a collaborative way. I shouldn't be the one writing about this. Let's try to do it together on a platform. And so we started together with different people such as Tonelli, Noma, Ansu Recoveries, Nicholas de Groponte, Jonah Bracken, one of the great architects from the Netherlands who worked on participation in 20-30 years ago, and still today. And so we did it together. And and then this actually went on Wikipedia. It's funny because as soon as we put in Wikipedia, before it was published in Domus, Wikipedia actually cancelled, erased it, saying it didn't have legitimacy. But as soon as actually it was published in Domus, then it became legit. And so actually now it's in Wikipedia, and then people started editing, adding, and contributing. But what could be a more collaborative open source architecture? However, at the end there was a problem. And the problem is that Domus, when they tell you to write in Notepad, at the end they want a picture of the person who did it. And so what type of picture, what type of portrait are we going to use? So in the end we decided to say, well, let's take a picture of all of us and combine them together in Photoshop and use that for Domus just to satisfy the And I want to finish with this to say that I hope that tomorrow's architect will look a little bit less like Le Corbusier, a little bit less like Corbusier, that with his hand, is making on his own plans for millions and millions of people, and a little bit more like this, like an architect that combines all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlo, and I'm trying to think of that resembles most of that picture. It doesn't kind of look like you.
No, it doesn't look like
anybody. Good idea. Okay, we've got time for questions now. I know some people here have been involved with bicycles and other things that have been touched on by
any comments or ideas? I can flag with your slides, but I think it's much better to work.
So if you have any complaints about the sound,
now the sound is great.
It's too loud.
Yes.
I have a question about the trash project.
Yeah.
When you're tracking trash, how would you be sure that the sensors weren't actually removed when the trash is sorted?
It's a great question. I'm repeating this at my favorite book, but basically, how can you be sure that the sensor had not been removed? Well, actually, we have to develop a lot of research on how to make sure that the sensor will be connected very well to the trash. Also, the sensor, the trash system is the way it processes the objects. Can actually damage a lot of things, so you actually have to cover the sensors. So it's the way we connected the sensors and the trash made us assured us that basically it was impossible to solve them unless you had to break one or the other. And we did something else as a project we're going to release in a few weeks. We actually looked at illegal smuggling of waste. And so we did the same thing, but actually looking at the electronics, illegal electronics that ship from the United States to Asia, mostly to Vietnam. And in that case, we also embedded it inside some of these electronics, and we realized that people didn't find out. In some cases, they found out, and we could tell. But in most cases, they didn't find out, and we just followed the flow of electronics, and we then went to look for the electronics in Vietnam itself to see where they ended up. So anyway, it's a good question. What I'm saying is that technically, and I will show you images of how we did it, we were sure that people could not be able to separate the two because they were so embedded and connected with each other. And in the case of electronics, we put it inside, we open the electronic, put it inside, and close the electronics, so that people wouldn't even realize that the tracking device was also inside.
In the movie Total Recall, the sensor that's supposed to be in Quaid's head ends up being picked up by a rat, and the guy, the original movie. So I wonder if in your case, with this trash, in fact, we were tracing some animals that might be consuming some of the rubbish.
Yeah, no, I don't think we did in this case, because actually, in that case, again, not from the point of view of how we embedded the sensor, that would not be possible, but you can actually easily sense animals as well. We had a great project idea that we developed a few years ago with the Scottish Highlands and Downs, And what we wanted to do, we never ended up doing, that was probably 4 or 5 years ago, at the beginning of 3G in terms of cell phone. We thought it would be great actually to use real-time beaming and sensing from some of the endangered species and some of the animals in ESALA in order to see all what is happening. And we thought, that beam was really very interesting on that. We learn much more about the life of some of these animals. And some of these have become more common today, like GoPros. I don't know if you've seen all those videos of people putting GoPros on falcons and eagles, and so that becomes very interesting of how you use this in order to better understand wildlife as well. So it's a valid point. Not these type of sensors for crash, but other type of sensors, especially sensors with that will be Yes?
When we introduced the coordinated wheel video, you said that the problem initially was how to deal with traffic. But I didn't really understand from the video how you contributed to making it work.
Totally, I missed that. You're totally right, because I missed one point. The mayor came to us at the beginning and said, can we look at traffic? And we said, well, can you be a bit more specific? And she said, well, today 30% of people are using bicycles. And she said, I want to get to 50%. Today's between 30 and 50. And she said, I want to get to 50%. So how can we add additional layers to the cycling experience in order to make it even more appealing or pleasant and so on. So that's how when we started working with bicycle, what could be added to bicycles. And what the Copenhagen wheel does, it does basically two things. The first thing is that because you get your energy, and it gives you that energy, then it's almost like if you take a hilly city, it turns it into flat. When you're going downhill, you get your energy, you get it back when you're going uphill. You've got a big city, it makes it smaller because you've got energy, they supplement your torque. And that's quite important if you think about, just as an aside, today electric bicycles are the faster growing type of transportation in the world. And you think about places such as Beijing. If you're in Beijing, if you go from Wangfujing to say the new Olympic district, I think it's around, if you go to that type of ring, it's around 20 kilometers. So if you need to cycle, it's 20 kilometers in only 20 minutes, it's a lot of miles. So it goes up and supplements that, it makes biking more possible even in conditions where you couldn't be. So the first thing is actually that practically makes hilly city like a flat city, it makes it like a smaller city, so it allows people to cycle in conditions where they would be more difficult to do it. And then it has all of the digital dimension that we think is very important because it means actually community of cycling, cyclists collect information, share information, and with that information, forcing the city to take action. You can use, we have implemented here, you can also use data from accelerometer, and then you can then tell the city where they need to fix the bicycle lanes and other things. So it becomes a way in order to promote cycling. So you're totally right, I missed to mention that from looking at traffic in general, it went into actually how can we add a new layer to life in order to have people go from 30 to 50 to 50% budget. Yeah.
Really like the way you're connecting pollution data from sensors. We're very interested in how that data is then used. Have you done any experiments on enabling the cyclists as advocates of groups themselves to use that data as new science to go back into the policy process?
Totally. That's a very interesting point, and I'll share with you a couple of things. So I think just a couple of slides. So how is this? The question is, so we do a lot of sensing, so we collect a lot of information. How can we use that information? Now, first of all, the information is really the basis of planning. If you go back to the origin of modern planning, if you look at Élisée Reclus, Élisée Reclus used to write about planning is the consequence of survey. First you survey, you understand what is the place, and then you plan. The two things are really deeply embedded. Now the survey is radically changing because of the way we can understand the city in a different way. Because of big data, if you want. It's a simple aside to take all the data, now that in 2 days, we produce as much data as humanity could produce for thousands of years till 2003. So take all the information produced by humanity, including Shakespeare, Chaucer, Dante, whatever you want, from the beginning of 2003, the same amount of information is what we produce today every couple of days. It's not the same quality. We don't get the Shakespeare every weekend, but actually the quantity itself is the same. So this incredible amount of data which is serving, what Elisabeth Krüffler calls serving, is what we can use now to plan this in a different way. So that is the response in the longer term. So how can we use this information and this knowledge in order to plan the city? But more interesting is actually how you can use this information and share with people, and then people take action themselves. In a cybernetic loop, it's like a distributed system. It's not a centralized system, it's a distributed. And that can happen in different ways. And we experimented with that. There's a few papers we did on that. On the tracking side, on the trash tracking side, we really did a platform so that people could themselves look at where the stuff was going. So the example of the plastic bottle before. In the case of the Schengen Biennale, we couldn't measure that, but we wanted to make data accessible to people so that actually they could be the one to protest with the government or to say today I'm not taking this route or taking another route because it's less polluted. And that is also the center of what we do in Singapore with a project that didn't show today called Live Singapore. We take a lot of real-time data and share with people, looking at really how this enacts different features. There's a final point I want to mention is that data also allows other different things. And one of the most exciting things you can do is build it into a section of just a little bit. A quick step back. What we're trying to do with the lab is not dissimilar to what Dorothea would call comprehensive anticipatory design science. Actually, that's something that surprisingly enough he proposed initially in 1956 when he was lecturing at MIT. And that's also something that you might have seen a new book by Anthony Dunn from RCA in London that talks about speculative design. So within the really architecture and design should help us to propose different scenarios of how we can design different possible conditions for the city, for instance, and so that then there can be an informed discussion in society about those scenarios and see if we want to go that way or not. So I think that is how we see our role. When we see our role as architects, designers, trying to design things that could be relevant tomorrow and use them in order to really understand how we can shape our cities and how our cities can, and how we can inform decisions about some of these conditions. In doing that, it's very important to be able to quantify also some of these effects. And I want to share with you an example that, so in a lot of the projects we do, we usually say that the best projects should be both published in the top scientific journals, but also be exhibited at MoMA or events in places where they should have both the vision and also the science behind. That's related to Fuller's anticipatory, comprehensive anticipatory design science. In this project, this is answering your question about how to use the data. We use a lot of new mathematics we developed to look at the following question. What you see here is actually, I showed before a map of Lisbon, the taxi. That's the same information in your city. You see every taxi pick up and drop off in the city of New York. What you see here is actually JFK Airport. And every little dot is somebody jumping on a taxi or getting off the taxi. Then you can look at the same thing at the scale of the whole city. So you can see all Manhattan and the borough, you see where people go in taxi or another one. And then you can ask yourself, what? And this is a design question. What if people could actually share a taxi? What would happen? These days we like to share everything. We like to share even the most intimate space in our life, like think about Airbnb or couch surfing. A lot of this has been really enabled by this real-time information. Why did we have Airbnb 10 years ago? Because you didn't have that easiness of collecting information, sharing information about the availability of the room, of an apartment, of a bedroom, and also having information about who the other people are with the rating system on the social network. So that is what enables something, one of the big enablers of something like Airbnb. So in this case we say, what if people were to share more? And what would be the consequence of that? And so in order to do this, we had to develop a new mathematical framework. If you look at the traditional way to look at this in mathematics would be what is called linear programming. But when you got big data, actually linear programming starts to fail at this scale because of the sheer amount of information in the process. So we developed something, this was in PNAS, the proceeding of the National Academy of Science just a few weeks ago. So we developed something we call shareability networks, which is actually based on, what it does, it transforms a dynamic problem into a static problem by using network science. And then you can actually run optimization algorithms on the network here, the shareability network, in order to answer the question I asked before. And what we found is quite amazing, is that in a city such as New York, you could take everybody to destination when they need to be there, give or take a couple of minutes, a few minutes, and by using 40% less cars than what we have today. So you can actually slash the amount of cars in your city by 40% and still take everybody to the destination when you need to be. So that's another example where we have a design question. Our design question is, can we design a city where actually mobility is shared more with people? And then we need to use mathematics or analytical tools in order to answer that question. So just to summarize, in a certain sense, your question was about how to use the information. I think, first of all, you use it in order to share with people. You use it in order to use it as a basic, a survey for planning better the city, like Elisabeth would say. And you use it also as a basis for a lot of analytics, but not necessarily analytics that help you to understand a certain condition, but analytics that you can use in a designed way. By design, I mean both Albert Einstein or Herbert Simon. Herbert Simon and Einstein and many others. Heisenberg said, engineering and design is about how the world could be, science is how the world is. And here we're using analytics or mathematics in order to see how the world could be. What would happen in your city if people were ready to share it? So these are just some examples of how the data can really help you to transform the city through people or through other tools. Any other questions? Yeah, sorry, I killed the book by turning off the lights.
I turned the lights off.
Yes, two questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Like perhaps with the water pavilion, where's the water come from, where's it going?
The water pavilion, all the water is recycled, so the water just in.
So it goes to drains or
yeah, it drains and goes there. Yeah, we didn't want actually, and we wanted to be very sustainable, so we didn't want to waste any water. What it does, it's quite interesting, is that also the water, Spain will be very hot during the summer, so everything in the expo was air conditioned, and actually by using the water we will create a very cool space because of evaporative cooling. So you use a little bit for cooling, but it creates a beautiful plaza where people enjoy staying because we got evaporative cooling next to the water. Yes?
So it seems like it's real designers at the same time, but to be quite selective about what we get in terms of data. And it seems like that some of the projects have this huge quantity of data. Do you have any kind of method where you come quite selective with the data? Right.
Say again, you mean a method for selecting the data
or be selective about the data that you gain?
Yeah, I mean, one of the you always need to look at the data in a critical way for two reasons. The first one is what I mentioned before, the Calvino story. All of this data is great, it's big data, it's changing industry, it's changing urbanism, it's changing design, it's transforming our cities, but it's also changing a lot of things about society we need to be very aware of. And actually, that's something we feel very passionate about. Last year, we organized a symposium in MIT called Engaging Data. We had Noam Chomsky, professor and activist at MIT, colleague and activist at MIT. We had ex-Nobel's lawyers, came Saskia Sassen and others, really to talk about this issue. So what I'm saying is you need always to be quite critical about the data from the beginning, and also you need to always look when you got data, but this is something where you don't have control of how you collect the data. In the old days, you would do an experiment in the social sciences, and you'd be very, very cautious about what you collect, what you don't collect, and so you would try to have a representative sample, and you can control it. Yeah. You don't. If you look at data from cell phone, at the beginning especially, it was a self-selective, just some new system. So you always need to be very, very careful. The good thing is that, since we did the first project in 2006, at the time, cell phones, well, in Italy they were capturing probably 80% of the population, but in many countries, they were still growing. Now you've got a condition where on the planet you've got more cell phones than people. And so it's easier to know that cell phones will capture it. We'll give information about virtually everybody, but you always need to ask the question. But when you get the data, how the data was collected, what are the possible biases in the data, and so on. So what we're seeing is the shift between the old days when we had very little data, but very controlled, to the condition today we have huge amount of data, but we have less control. We need to be very selective and attentive about possible biases in the data themselves.
given the amount of electronics in some of the projects responsible, do you consider any of the projects those you're being had benefits and risks?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a great question. Now, the reason I showed the wall in the video is it was in a certain sense hacked, not really hacked, it stopped working. There was one example of what happens when some electronics fails. And this is really something that we need to address a lot in the coming years. You know, the visual video was a good example, but you can have bad examples of something failing or something being hacked. Now, we all know what happens when our computer crashes because of a virus, and that's not fun. But nobody dies, maybe we lose some data, but it's fine. Now, our cars are becoming like computers on wheels. Our cars are becoming, think about the Toyota Prius, hybrid cars tomorrow, already today, thinking about self-driving cars, they're like computers on wheels. So if a computer crashes your car, that's less fun. So in a certain sense, when you combine what even people in engineering call cyber-physical systems. So when you have a cyber-physical system, if something happens to the cyber part of the system, then the physical side can suffer a lot. And I think you've all seen the latest James Bond movie, where this is actually a good part of the plot. The fact that actually by changing the digital side, you can provoke incredible damage on the physical side of the city. It's not just science fiction. If you really think about Stuxnet, just a few years ago in Iran, it was just a piece of software in order to damage the nuclear program for the country. So all of this is very important. I don't think just a simple solution, but there's something we all need to be very cautious and concerned about. And we see it more and more because everything in our lives, from this computer, the projector, the lighting, homes in our cities, is becoming a cyber-physical system. And there's different technical solutions, but again, maybe it's not the time to go for them, but it's a very important question. It's a question that we need to look at more and more. I'll tell you just one thing. The only thing we shouldn't do is actually to run a city like a centralized system, with an operating system which is centralized and can crash. So the last thing you want is to have a kind of Windows system running your city.
This is time for one more question. Mark, did you want to? We can have private conversations afterwards. Okay. That'll be the last question.
I think one point you were talking about, it was the taxi thing for New York, and you were saying instead of trying to apply this idea to New York, maybe in the reverse way we could design the cities in a way that could make the system easier. Did I get that correct?
Well, what I was saying, I was answering the question was about how do you use all the data? How do you use the data? And my point was, use all the data for, you can analyze the data to, to see, look at different services that could be implemented, and or you can use it, as I was saying, in the longer term for planning, or use it by sharing with people, and then people will respond themselves. Now, it's very important when you look at this, because it's very important to see where you want your road to finish. And in the case of the lab, our goal we see is that what we call the urban demo, to demonstrate, to show some possible potential of how our cities or our buildings could be, and to stimulate the debate in society about that. So in a certain sense, we don't want necessarily to go to implementation, but we want to show. In many cases, then other people will implement it. As a thing that when we did the project on taxis, we are told that actually Uber was inspired, and Uber was actually partially inspired by the results we had in New York City. Something else, at the same time, Nat Rothschild in London launched a system which is actually more or less the same, allowing people to share taxis, just a few weeks ago, taxis in London. So, in a certain sense, you can just develop something quantified, and then other people will develop it further. You always need to understand where you want to finish. What we realized over the past few years is actually sometimes it's fun also to take it on the ways, to do a startup, and that actually has this kind of liberating effect that I was talking about before, when I mentioned Kalogianni, of how you can actually come up with an idea and then go to implementation without the need to have a client. So you can be an architect or designer without the old day of a client telling you what to do.
Thank you very much, Carlo. I guess you've inspired us all to think more about architecture, data, design, and other things besides. It's all coming together. We'll have a round of applause in a minute. Before we do, amongst the audience here, there some people who are architecture students, practitioners even. There are, I think, social scientists and computer scientists maybe, PhD students, undergrads, postgrads, and staff. I'm sure you're all itching to have some private discussions, and you perhaps know what some of the people here are up to, because there's some activity going on to do with data and urban interventions of various kinds. Now, after this session, probably the most important thing is we're going for a glass of wine, or several glasses of wine, over at Edinburgh College of Arts, Lauriston campus, which is half a mile from here, so getting your environmentally aware taxis and bicycles and so on, shut on over there. And after that, then we'll be conducting a workshop, which is being planned by Fabrizio and Dorothea and some others. And Carlo will be there participating and helping us think through the data, because we've got lots of data and we'll be gathering more data. It's mainly about mood and environment, and it's data that's to do with what's gathered through electroencephalography techniques. We have some data already stored. If it's not raining, we actually collect some more data. Anyway, so that's the plan. So please don't just disappear home, but join us. We'll all walk over together if we don't have bikes or taxis. But before that, perhaps you could join with me in thanking Carlo for a very